Thank you so much for joining me in the Louie File. We are now in part 3 of a trip through Romans 7. And I hope you have enjoyed these videos. I hope if you haven't seen them that you'll go back and watch the first one and just walk on through it with us. I think this is a huge subject. It's a very big deal to get a hold of this. So Romans 6, Paul declares to us that we have died to sin. Those of us that have been baptized, joined to Christ in His death, burial, and resurrection, have died to sin. We've died to it, and if we have died to sin, we have been freed from it. And Romans 6 tells us that we got to know this, we got to count on it, and we got to reckon on it. We got to believe that it's true. We have really, truly, through Christ, died to sin. Now, once we see that, once we acknowledge that, receive it, believe it, now we have to stop presenting our members, our bodies, our minds to sin for unrighteousness. Stop handing ourselves over. See, once you've been freed from sin, you now have a right to say no to it. And you can say no to sin, and you can say yes to Christ. So now we stop offering our bodies in one direction, and we start offering ourselves in another. The Romans 6 calls us instruments, or weapons, or vessels, whatever the word is in your Bible. Stop presenting yourself as a weapon or an instrument of unrighteousness, but rather as one of righteousness, as one who is alive from the dead. Now that's an important point. And in Romans 7, Paul says, since we know we've died to sin, we have to know we've died to law. In other words, we've died to the law of commandments written in stone on tablets of stone. We're always living according to law in a sense, which we'll get to in Romans 8, because there's the law of the Spirit of life and there's the law of sin and death. But right now we're primarily talking about the 10 Commandments. That's the term, the law, is primarily aimed at that, because the Apostle Paul is telling us that the law in itself is not the problem. The commandments aren't the problem, because the commandments point out the fact that we have sin. And in his case, it's coveting. The Apostle Paul said, I wouldn't have even known what coveting was if the law had not said, do not covet. And then he gets into this thing, he says, but sin takes opportunity. The sin itself sounds like a person who is taking advantage of God's holy and just and right law. And it really makes sense when you see it that way. In Romans 7, verse 8, it says, but sin taking opportunity through the commandment produced in me coveting of every kind. So the law's not producing coveting. It's sin in Paul that is producing coveting because of it's using the law. Wow. All right, let's flip ahead for just a second. I want you to see this verse. It's in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 56. 1 Corinthians 15:56. The Apostle Paul says, the sting of death is sin. But listen to this. And the power of sin is the law. Whoa. So sin gets its power through the law. We talked about it last time, how you see a sign that says do not touch wet paint, or don't walk on the grass. What happens? There's something in there, within us, that wants to touch the wall. Is that paint really wet? And I would have never thought to touch that wall if that sign didn't direct my attention to the fact that the paint is wet. But since that commandment came, Paul says sin sprang to life. You see, God gave the law so the transgression would increase. Why? You know what? We're all born in Adam, sinners. We're all joined to what 1 John calls the spirit of error. And we don't even know it. We think we're just our own person. We think we're living our own lives. We're in charge of ourselves. We make our own decisions. I used to tell my wife back in my addiction days, I used to say, it's my life. I do what I want to do. I am not hurting anyone but myself. One of the biggest lies ever, let me tell you. So the Apostle Paul is telling us that God gave the law to expose sin in us. But then he goes on to say that sin is doing things in us. It's taking opportunity and it's producing things. And in Romans 7:9 it says that sin became alive. And then verse 11, sin taking opportunity deceived me. It sounds like a person. In the beginning of Romans 7, there's two husbands, two different directions we can go in a marriage union. And we know that when you're born again, you're joined to Christ to bear fruit for God. But when we were in our flesh, we had sinful passions aroused by the law and produced fruit for death. So when the law says don't covet, Paul says I'm trying not to covet, but every time I try not to covet, I just covet more. Wow. So the law, I always use this illustration that the law is like a mirror. So when you get up in the morning, you go to the bathroom and you look in the mirror and your eyes are all gunky and your teeth need brushed and your hair needs combed and your face needs washed, whatever else might happen, you look in the mirror and you see all these flaws and problems in your face. You're thinking, man. So you reach up and you get the mirror off the wall and you brush your hair with it. You brush your teeth with it. No, you don't do that. The law is not there to fix you. The law is there to point out your problem. The law is there to direct you to the hairbrush, to the toothbrush, to the washcloth. And the law is there to show you you have the problem, but it cannot fix you. Galatians tells us the law is our schoolmaster to lead us to Christ. And that's exactly what it's for. So once we see the law's real purpose, then we can actually find the real solution. But what about this person we're calling sin? Join me on the next video and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching the Louie File. Hope it's helping.